Have you ever wondered who truly rules this world? What if those who fell from heaven never actually left, but simply changed their names, their symbols, and their faces? What if what we call progress, system, or even modern civilization is nothing more than the continuation of an ancient rebellion, one that began beyond the stars? Since the dawn of time, humanity has been told that good triumphed over evil, that the fallen ones were cast out forever. But what if the Gnostics were right when they said the opposite? What if the world we live in today is still under their influence? A spiritual empire hidden behind technology, media, and power? Today, we'll explore what philosopher Hans Jonas discovered when he studied the Gnostics, their vision of the cosmos as a prison built by false gods, and their belief that liberation comes not from obedience, but from awakening. You'll see how ancient celestial rebellion may still shape our governments, our beliefs, and even our very thoughts. But before we reveal this forbidden truth, take a moment to subscribe and join our community of seekers. Because in a world built on illusion, only knowledge, gnosis, can set you free. The story humanity was told begins with light defeating darkness. Yet, according to the Gnostics, that was only the surface of a much deeper deception. They believed that the so-called creators of this material world were not divine beings of pure light, but fallen power spiritual entities who desired to rule instead of serve. These were the archons, servants of the false creator known as the demiurge, who built this world not as a paradise, but as a trap. Over centuries, this idea was buried, labeled as heresy, and erased from mainstream religion. But traces of it still remain in ancient Coptic texts, in the Nag Hammadi library, and in the writings that Hans Jonas studied. Jonas realized that the Gnostics saw existence itself as rebellion. The same cosmic revolt that once cast the angels down from heaven now echoes through every human system of power. Think about it, our world celebrates control, consumption, and dominance. Could it be that the same fallen forces simply restructured themselves into what we now call civilization? If the archons once ruled from the heavens, perhaps today they rule through institutions, through media, and through the invisible architecture of thought that keeps us obedient. And have you ever felt that something about this reality doesn't fit? That despite all progress, something sacred was lost along the way? If you have, the Gnostics would say that's your spirit, remembering the truth, trying to wake up inside the prison built by the fallen ones. To understand how the ancient fall of the angels could still echo in our world, we must go back to the Gnostic interpretation of creation itself. The Gnostics believed that in the beginning, there was an unknowable source, a pure and infinite light, beyond time, beyond even the concept of God, as religions later defined it. From this source emanated spiritual beings called eons, expressions of divine consciousness. But one of them, Sophia, desired to create without the consent of the whole. In that act of separation, she gave birth to something imperfect, the demiurge, a being blind to the higher light, who mistook himself for the ultimate creator. This was the moment of cosmic rebellion. The demiurge and his archons shaped the material universe, not out of divine love, but out of ignorance and pride. They built a counterfeit reality, a copy of the spiritual world, where human souls, fragments of divine light, would be trapped in bodies of flesh, bound by illusion. And according to Gnostic texts, like the Apocryphon of John, this demiurge declared, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." Those words, the Gnostics said, were the mark of his blindness. Hans Jonas, one of the most respected interpreters of Gnostic thought, saw in this myth something profoundly modern. To him, the demiurge symbolized humanity's alienation, how systems we create for order and progress can turn against us, becoming prisons of their own. He suggested that our technological, bureaucratic, and ideological systems might be the continuation of that same fallen impulse, the will to dominate creation instead of harmonize with it. Look around. We live in a world ruled by invisible algorithms, data empires, and endless hierarchies of control. Governments and corporations promise salvation through progress, yet people feel more spiritually lost than ever. The Gnostics would call this the world of the archons, a structure of power that thrives on keeping you asleep, disconnected from your inner light. Every distraction, every screen, every false sense of freedom could be part of this deeper architecture of control. Ask yourself, have you ever wondered why, despite all our knowledge, humanity seems to repeat the same cycles of war, greed, and manipulation? Could it be that the rebellion of the fallen angels never ended, but simply evolved? That the same forces once cast down from heaven now manifest through human systems that worship control instead of wisdom? This is what Hans Jonas meant when he connected the Gnostic vision to modern life. The archons no longer wear wings or bear flaming swords. They wear suits, manage networks, and speak in the language of progress. Yet their purpose remains the same: to keep you believing that this world, this illusion, is all there is. And if that's true, then the rebellion wasn't only against heaven, it's still happening right here, every single day. If the world truly carries the shadow of an ancient celestial rebellion, then the most dangerous truth was never that the fallen ones existed, but that they still hold influence. To maintain control over humanity, the first act of domination wasn't through weapons or laws, but through belief. According to the Gnostics, the archons did not only build a false material world, they built a false story about it, a narrative so deeply woven into human consciousness that people would defend it as sacred truth. When the early Gnostics began sharing their revelations, around the first centuries after Christ, their message was explosive. They claimed that the world most people worshipped was, in fact, the creation of a blind God. They spoke of a divine spark trapped in human beings, a light forgotten under layers of obedience and fear. To them, salvation wasn't achieved through submission to authority, but through gnosis inner awakening, direct knowledge of the divine. This was an unbearable threat to those who built their power on spiritual dependence. The rising Orthodox Church, in alliance with imperial structures, needed unity and control. So, the Gnostic texts were declared heretical. Their temples were destroyed, their followers persecuted, and their scriptures buried, literally hidden in deserts. As in the case of the Nag Hammadi library, discovered only in 1945, for over 15 centuries, their voices were silenced. And yet, the Gnostics had predicted this. They knew that truth, once revealed, must hide again until the world was ready to hear it. Hans Jonas examined this suppression with a philosopher's eye. He noticed how the Church transformed the Gnostic idea of inner knowledge into external authority. Salvation became something granted by an institution, not discovered through awakening. The demiurge, who in Gnostic myth claimed divine monopoly, was mirrored by earthly structures that did the same deciding: who could speak for God, who could interpret Scripture, who could control the gates of heaven. This transformation wasn't just religious. It became cultural and psychological. The Gnostics taught that the archons rule through ignorance, by convincing souls that they are powerless, unworthy, and separate from the divine. Over time, this same principle manifested through the rise of kingdoms, corporations, and governments, each claiming to bring order, yet keeping the masses spiritually asleep. The rebellion of the fallen angels thus evolved into what we now call the system, a vast, invisible network of control sustained by belief in its necessity. Look closely at the patterns of history. Empires fall, but hierarchy remains. Every generation believes it has broken free, yet a new form of domination takes the place of the old. Medieval theocracies gave way to industrial capitalism. Now, digital networks shape our reality with algorithms few can even comprehend. If the archons once manipulated faith, now they manipulate information, and perhaps that is the most perfect illusion of all. Hans Jonas wrote that modern humanity, in its obsession with control, has replaced the cosmic archons with technological ones. Machines now mediate knowledge. Systems decide what we see and what we believe. The Gnostics would say that these are the new veils of the demiurge illusions, designed to keep the divine spark within us from remembering its origin. But why was all this hidden? Because awakening even a small number of souls would threaten the foundation of every power built on deception. The Gnostics didn't want to destroy the world. They wanted to liberate the spirit from its bondage to false gods. And that kind of freedom, spiritual autonomy, is the greatest danger to those who feed on control. Think about it. When you question the system, when you refuse to conform, when you seek truth beyond dogma, you are repeating the first rebellion. You are echoing Sophia's divine yearning, the spark of creation that defied imitation. The Archons fear this because every awakened soul weakens their dominion. That is why they buried the truth under rituals, politics, and endless distractions. So perhaps the real battlefield isn't in the heavens at all. It's inside the human mind. The fallen angels may not rule from thrones of fire anymore, but from within the illusions we accept as real. And the only way to escape their dominion is to remember who you truly are. A fragment of light from a forgotten realm, imprisoned in flesh, but capable of awakening. Tell me, do you feel that this world is too heavy for the divine to have created it? That maybe, just maybe, something about the story doesn't add up? If so, then you're already beginning to see through the veil that hides the truth. What if everything we call good in this world is part of a trap, a brilliant imitation of divine order meant to keep us docile? That was the revelation the Gnostics whispered, and it remains one of the most subversive ideas ever conceived. They believed that the true source, the real God, has no form, no name, and no interest in power. This God is pure consciousness, infinite and unknowable. The material world, however, was the work of a lesser being, the demiurge, the first rebel. The Gnostics described the demiurge as both pitiful and dangerous an entity, blinded by its own arrogance. Having forgotten its origin in the divine light, it believed itself to be the only God. In its ignorance, it created the physical universe, and with it, the illusion of separation. From then on, everything that depended on matter, religion, hierarchy, domination was infected by this primal mistake. What we call the system today is simply the latest manifestation of that same blindness. Hans Jonas understood this not as literal mythology, but as psychological truth. He said the Gnostics were describing what happens when creation forgets its creator, when the human spirit identifies more with the material than with the infinite. This is why modern civilization, despite its brilliance, feels hollow. We've built towers of technology that reach the clouds, yet we are more disconnected from the inner light than ever before. In a sense, humanity has become the new demiurge, creating worlds without wisdom, machines without empathy, power without purpose. But within this darkness, there remains a spark, the divine particle that the Gnostics called the pneuma, the breath of God trapped inside every human being. They believed that this spark is the key to awakening. It cannot be taught by priests or granted by rulers. It can only be remembered. True salvation, they said, comes not from worship, but from recollection, from realizing that you were never truly separate from the divine to begin with. This was the revelation the powers of the world most feared, that every individual could find the divine within themselves, without needing intermediaries. Imagine what would happen if everyone understood this, if people stopped giving their energy to systems that feed on fear, guilt, and dependence. Every empire would crumble, not by war, but by the awakening of consciousness. The Gnostics called this awakening gnosis, meaning knowledge, but it wasn't intellectual knowledge. It was direct experience. To know God was to feel the spark inside yourself and recognize it as older than the stars. They taught that the fall of the angels wasn't just a story about celestial beings. It was a mirror for the human condition. Each of us is a fallen fragment of light, trapped in matter, struggling to return home. And each time we awaken, the original rebellion begins to reverse. Hans Jonas wrote that Gnosticism was the first existential religion. It didn't ask followers to believe, it asked them to remember. The idea was not to escape the world, but to see it for what it truly is, a shadow of divine reality, a reflection meant to be transcended. Once a person recognizes this illusion, the archons lose their power, because the only power they have is the one we give them through ignorance. Now, think of our modern systems of media that controls what we see, of algorithms that predict what we desire, of governments that promise protection but deliver fear. Don't these all serve the same function as the ancient archons? To keep human beings looking outward instead of inward? To make us forget that our essence is eternal, ungovernable, divine? Perhaps this is the true rebellion of the fallen angels. Not a war in heaven, but a psychological occupation of earth, an empire of distraction designed to make us forget that paradise was never lost, it was simply hidden inside us all along. And so, the forgotten revelation is not that the fallen angels rule the world, it's that they rule only as long as we remain asleep. The moment we awaken, their empire begins to fade, because no illusion can survive the light of awareness. Tell me, have you ever felt that flicker inside you? A brief sense that you're more than flesh, more than name, more than history? If so, then maybe the spark of Sophia is already moving within you, calling you home. If the fallen angels once ruled from the heavens, they now rule through systems so ordinary that we barely notice them. The Gnostics warned that the archons would not always appear as monstrous beings with wings of fire. Instead, they would adapt, reshaping themselves into laws, technologies, ideologies, and even habits of thought. What began as a celestial rebellion has become a psychological network that governs the modern mind. Look around you. The archons no longer whisper from clouds. They speak through screens. Their temples are not made of stone but of data, and their altars are the devices that glow in our hands. They rule not through fear of swords, but through the comfort of convenience. Every click, every like, every purchase is a tiny act of worship to a system that feeds on attention, emotion, and time, the new forms of spiritual energy. Jonas warned that modern humanity had created its own demiurge, the machine of progress that consumes its creators. He saw in the modern world a chilling reflection of the Gnostic cosmos, humans trapped in a labyrinth of their own making, alienated from nature, from one another, and from their divine origin. What was once described as a cosmic prison is now a digital one, invisible yet total. We no longer pray to the gods of heaven, but to the algorithms of relevance. And still, the illusion is perfect. The archons learned long ago that the most efficient form of control is not oppression, it's distraction. Keep the spirit entertained, and it will never ask questions about the cage it lives in. The Gnostics called this ignorance by design, a fog that keeps the divine spark asleep. Today, this fog is woven by media, ideology, and endless promises of satisfaction that never truly satisfy. Think about it. Why is it that we live in an age of infinite information, yet spiritual emptiness has never been deeper? Why do we feel so connected and yet so alone? The Gnostics would say this is not accidental. The archons feed on confusion, division, and despair. Every time humanity turns against itself, every time truth becomes relative, their power strengthens. The same rebellion that once shattered heaven now manifests as chaos within the human soul. But there is hope, and it begins with awareness. The moment you recognize the pattern, the illusion begins to crack. The Gnostics taught that gnosis, the awakening of inner knowledge, is contagious. When one light remembers itself, others begin to flicker awake. The empire of the archons cannot withstand self-awareness because it depends entirely on unconscious obedience. Jonas saw this awakening as both a spiritual and ethical revolution. He believed that by understanding the Gnostic vision, we could confront the nihilism of the modern age, the sense that life has no meaning. The Gnostics, he said, faced the same despair and turned it into fuel for awakening. They realized that meaning is not given by the world, it's remembered from within. Now imagine if millions remembered at once that the divine spark is alive in every being, that no institution or system has the right to claim ownership over truth. The entire illusion would collapse overnight. The fallen angels would no longer rule, not because they were defeated, But because humanity would no longer feed them, the archons would dissolve, like shadows before sunrise. You might feel small against such forces, but the Gnostics taught that even the smallest spark contains the memory of the infinite. The system may seem invincible, but its weakness is that it cannot create light, it can only imitate it. And imitation always fails when faced with truth. So ask yourself, what part of your life belongs to the system of the archons? Which beliefs, routines, or fears were never really yours, but implanted to keep you asleep? The search for that answer is the beginning of liberation. Because in the end, the fallen angels never truly ruled the world. They only ruled our perception of it. And the moment you awaken, even their illusion of power fades. So now we return to the question we began with. Do the fallen angels still rule the world? After walking through the hidden corridors of history, the forbidden teachings of the Gnostics, and the reflections of Hans Jonas, the answer is both terrifying and liberating. Yes, they still rule, but only because we allow them to. Their kingdom is not made of fire and darkness. It is built from ignorance, fear, and forgetfulness. It thrives in the spaces where humanity has stopped asking questions. The archons rule through every system that blinds you to your own divine essence. But their dominion ends the moment you awaken to what you truly are, a spark of the infinite, carrying the memory of the true God, the source beyond all names. This is what the Gnostics wanted us to remember. They were not rebels against faith. They were explorers of truth. They saw that the greatest rebellion was not against heaven, but against the chains of illusion. Hans Jonas understood this as the key to human freedom, to live as beings aware of the cosmic tragedy, and yet capable of transcending it through self-knowledge. When you recognize that the prison is made of shadows, you also recognize that you were never truly bound. Think about your own life for a moment. Every time you question a lie, every time you choose compassion over control, every time you seek understanding instead of judgment, you weaken the empire of the archons. Each small act of awareness is an act of spiritual rebellion. The Gnostics would call it a spark returning home. And that is the invitation this revelation carries. You don't need to fight the system with rage or destroy it with violence. The true awakening happens silently, in the depth of your being, when you turn your gaze inward and remember that you are not of this world. You are light trapped in matter, but not defined by it. And when enough of us awaken, the illusion itself begins to crumble, because the archons cannot rule over those who see through them. So if this message resonated with something deep inside you, something ancient, something that feels like a memory rather than an idea, then you are part of this awakening. Don't let it fade. Keep searching, keep questioning, keep remembering. Share your thoughts below in the comments, because your perspective may awaken someone else's light. And if you wish to keep uncovering the truths they tried to bury, subscribe and join our circle of seekers. Each video we create is a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the hidden story humanity forgot to tell. Liking, sharing, and commenting isn't just a digital act. It's a way of keeping this ancient flame alive against the empire of shadows. Because in the end, the Gnostics were right. Knowledge is liberation, and liberation is contagious. The fallen angels may still whisper through the systems of this world, but the more we awaken, the quieter their voices become. So I ask you one final question. What if the next revelation isn't hidden in ancient texts, but waiting inside you?